Here's every SSR character and every LSSR keepsake ranked on a tier list during August 2023 in no particular order, so let's get into it. Before we start, there are a couple of changes with this updated tier list format. The first being that Subterranean King won't be alienated from everyone and will be properly rated, and the second being that an additional SS rank has been created in order to separate the best of units from the cluster of great S-class units we currently have in the game. So now I'm gonna quickly brush through everyone ranked below the A tier. So everyone in the C tier are great at the start of the game, but get easily replaced the further you progress into the game. I've also included SR units and even one R unit in this tier list, as these units in particular are also great alternatives for SSR characters during early game. So going through the C tier, Atomic Samurai is a good AoE attacker for newer players. Garou is a row attacker that can seal/remove 1 energy from your opponent's team, which is useful during PvP. Piri Prisoner is a single target back row attacker, but is personally outshined by a hero who's a rarity under him, which I'll go over later. Sonic you can unlock for free and has a chance to speed up your team when using his ult, which is pretty nifty but is not really necessary later on in the game. And Subterranean King is still by far the worst SSR units in the game. If you get any other duelist on this tier list, please replace him for them in your lineups, trust me. With the SR units, Bakuzan's Berserk Core works well for PvP. Golden Ball is the same as Atomic Samurai, just a SR variant. Lilin provides internal injury as well as being able to heal for your team from her ult. Magic Trick Man is used for his bonus damage reduction passive, which will help you against the current force field meta. Sky King however is the opposite and boosts bonus damage, which works well with dot lineups like those who have force field. And finally, Moomin Rider is a R-rated unit, but he's great for early game as he can speed up one of your allies, as well as having unyielding once, so he can tank for a very heavy hit in the front row. Now cruising through the B tier, they're okay units that can be situational to use every now and then depending on what scenario you're in. So starting off with Alloy, the reason why he and Tank Top Master are a tier lower than last month is because I didn't really compare the gap between each tank in the game since I ranked most of them the same, which is definitely not the case. So for Alloy, he's a good starting tank where his passive grants ult damage reduction to his row, as well as him being able to unyield once, much like Moomin Rider. He's also good in Zombieman lineups as he can provide tenacity for free from his basic attack. Deep Sea King has a good core for PvP once you unlock him to level 4 in the laboratory, where he can seal 2 of your opponent's energy at the start of the battle. King can slot well in Esper lineups, but has long been outdated in terms of sealing energy and being a strong AoE attacker, but he can also heal your team, which is a pretty neat feature. Metal Bat is also a pretty good character, but you do need to invest in him quite a lot in order to make him work well with your team. Metal Knight is way out of meta since he was released as the very first official LSSR on the global version, and his AoE attacks are outclassed by many recent units. But his burn and injury are solid, which can work well with other units. Silverfang was only used for his passive during the Zombieman meta as he increased everyone's block rate and granted tenacity shields for those that blocked incoming attacks. Otherwise he's pretty useless nowadays and just stays in this tier. Terrible Tornado is the better AoE attacking alternative for Atomic Samurai, as well as being able to synergize very well with Beast King. Tank Top Master is a very good starting tank unit as he is very much accessible for newer players after using 200 heroic tickets, where he's the better choice out of choosing Subterranean King, Vaccine Man and himself. His Keepsake is also very accessible for spenders when they reach a certain top up milestone, and even for free to play as his Keepsake shards are a reward from club war chests. He provides tenacity for his entire row from his ult, which can be very strong depending on how much HP he's got. So he's a very good starting tank and he belongs in this B tier. And Vaccine Man has been demoted down A tier since he fills the same role as a dot booster, much like Monsterized Choze, but he's just the weaker alternative. He is however easier to 5-star than compared to Choze, so he's much more accessible for most players, but otherwise the rest of his skills are trash, as his ult is weak and inflicts burn, which is horrible, compared to Choze where he instead inflicts force field to a row and heals himself after he attacks from his passive. so Vaccine Man is the inferior dot booster, staying down at B tier. Amai Mask is a much better single target back row attacker than Piri Piri Prisoner, where he also inflicts injury to all units if you 5-star him, which is fairly easy to do, and works well with Beast King in the same team. Speaking of which, Beast King works really well with units who inflict injury, as his passive allows himself to follow up on an enemy who is currently inflicted with injury. Lightning Genji is already being used even before Bomb comes out, as his passive being able to buff attack for all allies who have tenacity shields onto them is very useful in many aspects of the game. And finally, Dr. Genos is also a great unit for many players, as his core is the best SR core, and even Deep Sea King in most scenarios, as the clones he summons in the front row can screw up the enemy's attack patterns. His passive is also great with Zombieman and Gyoro Gyoro cores, as he raises the attack of allies whenever they heal, which both cores provide. Now, moving on to the 3 remaining tiers. A tier are units you can invest in for your main lineups. S tier are amazing units that are very useful in many aspects of the game. And finally, the SS tier are the creme de la creme. They're just so good in every aspect of the game, you cannot really skip for them. So going down the order, first we have SSR Amai, which will be put into the A tier, which he was S tier before. The main reason for his demotion is due to the release of Sonic V2, who will eventually replace Amai as the main speedster, since Sonic provides much more useful buffs as well as being a duelist, which is not competitive than compared to the many grapplers we currently have in the game. Otherwise, his shields are still very useful for many scenarios, and he's your only big hero speedster other than Moomin Rider, so he's still very useful in the game and will stay in the A tier. Next up we have Awaken Terrible Tornado, which is going to be the first character being the top SS tier. So now with her Keepsake out as well as Mirage Trials being released, you definitely cannot deny that she's one of the best, if not the best unit currently in the game at the moment. Her force field is what will push you far through the Mirage Trials and bounty missions, as those resilience shields are a big problem, as I've seen some high-end players still not being able to defeat Bomb in bounty missions. But I can even without her Keepsake, so no hard flex there. She's just great in every aspect of the game at the moment. However, in PvP, a stronger and faster Genos can still be able to one-shot her, but only the top whales will be able to do that, since many, if not most of them, have already reverted their Genos to invest their Ascension cards onto other units such as ATT, to prepare for once Bomb comes out. Anyways, with or without her Keepsake, she's still a top 3 unit currently, so she'll stay in this SS tier. Next up we have the newly awaited Awakened Vaccine Man, which will be going in the A tier. So despite his release being in the hero backup stick, he's only accessible to whales at the moment. But in the last 7 days, from what I've seen from those using him, he definitely belongs in the A tier. Those in PvP with a faster Sonic is able to kill off Vaccine Man straight away, since Vaccine Man's unable to trigger his unyielding until an enemy has been inflicted with Force Field, which even if you put him in the front row, there are also another drawback with that there are many units such as ATT or RMG that are also important to speed up. So the front row is also very competitive, so he's not really fitted well at the moment with Sonic V2 being released. Otherwise, he's basically a much weaker version of ATT, so he'll still be very useful in Mirage Trials and Bounty missions once the majority of spenders unlock him during next month. But for now, he belongs in the A tier since he'll be the best AoE attacker for your monster lineups. Moving on to Boros, he belongs in the A tier again. He's a free Esper, great for starting players as a single target attacker and very viable during Gyoro Gyoro meta, as he is another Esper that you can use for Gyoro Gyoro's core. He's mainly used nowadays against Club Wars Boros or in-game modes that require 3 teams such as Resist Invasion, Club Wars, Dojo Clash, etc. So very solid unit altogether, and he'll remain in the A tier. Next up is Child Emperor, which also belongs in the A tier. He is the best SSR core character in the game and can be used in 3-team game modes to fill for the core in your 3rd team, other than Zombieman and Gyoro Gyoro. He's also the best core for newer players who don't have any LSSR core units, such as the 2 I just mentioned previously and Bomb in the future. He's also very useful for his stun, as he can be used alongside Sky King and Lightning Max for stun strats, which can be very useful for PvE, and especially with Gale Wind in the future, as I myself did use Child Emperor and Sky King to defeat the Institute of Genetics very early in the game. So overall, he's a very good core character. I still use him, so he's definitely belonging in the A tier. Next up we have Carnage Kabuto, who also belongs in the A tier. He's the better tank out of the 3 grappler SSR tanks, especially if you got his Keepsake in the Claw Machine. Otherwise, his damage reflect passive is really good for PvE and for monster teams, as he has pretty good survivability. He is the best starting tank units, and once his SSR Plus variant does release, his second form is a must-have for all players, so definitely look out for him at the end of the year or at the beginning of the new year. Moving on to Fleshy Flash, he will belong in the A tier. He is still relatively OP in PvP modes, such as in Live Clash and in Arena, if he is heavily invested in, due to the bonus damage that he deals from his passive and follow-ups, which happens for half of every round. Following along, we have G4, which also belongs in the A tier. He is a great DPS unit, with his kit providing charge damage, which is damage being able to ignore shields, and his kit providing Shatter, which allows enemies inflicted to take more damage when attacked. He is still very useful against Club Boss Boros and for the monsters side of your teams, but he is locked behind a paywall, which is $10, but he is a very great character to pull for beginners if you do have the $10 to spare, as I would recommend him to have early on in the game, so definitely get him, and he does belong in this tier. Next up we have Garou, who belongs in the A tier, so his AoE internal injury is great for both PvP and PvE, and other burst damage characters such as RMG and Genos can do massive amounts of damage on those inflicted with his internal injury, as well as Garou being able to inflict internal injury whenever he follows up on an enemy. The reason why he is down in the A tier is because the grappler slots have become much more competitive in both PvP and PvE lineups, especially once Bomb comes out. Otherwise, he's still an amazing unit that can be used for your 3-team game modes to fill in for your grappler or AoE attacker slot, so he will remain in the A tier. Next up we have SSR Genos, which will belong in the S tier. So basically, to sum him up as a character, he is the Robert J. Oppenheimer's atomic bomb. Wait a minute, why didn't the sound come? Anyways, he's still highly used in many scenarios due to his insane burst DPS damage, which is able to nuke ATT. However, what makes him lower than ATT is that in PvE modes, such as in Mirage Trials and Bounty Missions, those resilience shields have finally made you Genos pullers realize that you cannot go through the whole game in putting every little piece of investment you can fit onto him. So rest in piss, Genos, we will be smoking that Genos pack, you won't be missed. But overall, he's still super useful in PvP and in 3-team game modes, so he definitely belongs in the S tier. Next up we have Gyoro Gyoro, who will belong in the S tier, since we're still in his meta, so he has to go in this tier. The reason why he's not any higher is because he's really only used for his core and nothing more, where those within the SS tier are super powerful units even without any cores, and they're just in a league of their own. So with Gyoro Gyoro, his max HP and heal rate buffs provide great survivability for your whole team, as well as synergizing very well with so many other espers such as RMG and ATT, where espers are needed to activate his core skills. His upgraded cores from the laboratory are also really good, as his level 4 core buffs ult damage and his level 10 core buffs dot damage, which ATT will absolutely shine in. Unfortunately, he was locked behind a paywall, which really sucked for free-to-play, but eventually he will be available in the heroic summons, much like Phoenix Man, but in another year or so you will have to be pretty patient, unfortunately. Moving on to Goketsu, he can either belong in the S or A tier, but I'll be slotting him into the A tier at the moment, since I want to emphasize that there is a number 1 tank in the game, as Goketsu is a close second. So with Goketsu, he's an offensive tank as he increases heal and shield rates for his surrounding allies, as well as being able to heal himself from his ult, which makes his survivability very high, and his damage with those who pulled his Keepsake is menacing, and especially in live clash with his ultra ultimate, it is a massive problem. However, he's often replaced by Amai and or Watchdog Man since they provide more utility in most scenarios, so Gamma, if you are listening, please replace him out of your main PvP lineup now, especially since you pulled for Sonic V2, now you just can't hang on to him anymore for as long as you have. Just replace Goketsu, he's not really worth it anymore. But Goketsu's still a very useful unit for monster teams and for 3-team game modes, so he will definitely remain in the A tier. Moving along to Groribas, he will be placed in the A tier and not the B tier from before, so I do apologise for putting him in the B tier last month, since he is very hard a character to obtain, as you do need to keep buying his shards for gems in the mystery stores, which is way too expensive for free-to-play players. But I can't overlook the fact that he synergizes super well with dot teams, where he can boost your team's attack up to 30% if 3 enemies are inflicted with his corrosion, which is hella deadly with ATT in your team. But his downside is just he's super hard to obtain. Hopefully there will be a raid up event for him in the future, since he is a great attack buffer to have in your team, so he will belong in the A tier for the time being. Next up we have Monsterized Choze, which will also be in the A tier. So he synergizes really well with ATT and in dot lineups, as his passive boosts dot damage, especially since we are currently living through the force field era in PvP, as dot is very OP in live clash. He is the better alternative compared to Vaccine Man, but is much harder to obtain, so many players may not have him unless you got super lucky or you pulled him during his raid up banner. Overall, he's a solid character and has good survivability, much more better than Vaccine Man, so he will belong in the A tier. Following along, we have Melzagard, which I'll be putting in the A tier. So Melzagard serves as a great tank and Esper to fill for Gyoro Gyoro's core. He is able to heal himself and all of his allies after he attacks, as well as sharing 20% of his damage dealt to allies to be directed towards him as well, on top of which he also reduces the damage taken by 50%. So he really shines during the Gyoro Gyoro meta. The only downside is that if you do know, he is currently the rarest unit to get, since he's only obtainable through the Superb Summons, which have a 0.5% chance of pulling for an SSR, on top of which there are 6 SSRs within that pool, so you'll have a 1 in 1200 chance of getting Melzagard, which is going to be a very long grind. Otherwise, he will dip once Bomb comes out, but for the time being, he's a A-tier unit for sure. Moving on to his monster ally, we have Phoenix Man, who just got released in the Heroic Summons and will remain as a A-tier unit. So now he will be a great alternative for Zombieman for newer players, as he will fill the reviver role for those that wanted one, as now he is free to play accessible. Otherwise, with Phoenix Man, he's not really worth investing heavily into, as he's mainly used for his revives in order to counter those single target attackers such as RMG and Sonic V2. That's basically the main reason why he belongs in the A tier, since he's super useful to put in the back row to counter opposing RMGs during monster tournaments. Otherwise, he would have been put in the B tier since ATT counters him heavily. Speaking of RMG, she definitely belongs in the SS tier. Must I say more? She's amazing in all aspects of the game, and now many players such as myself have unlocked her 5P awakening, which makes her such an amazing character. And the reason why is in a long period battle, she'll be able to deal more overall damage than Sonic V2, because she's able to deal 5 follow-ups per round, and 6 if you use Gyoro Gyoro's basic attack, as she'll also be able to crit during those follow-ups, so she'll still be your main damage dealer against bosses such as Club Boss Boros. Other than that, please pull for a Keepsake during her rerun if you plan on pulling her, because she is a game changer with her Keepsake. You need to pull for a Keepsake. Otherwise, if you are a newer player and don't have many black tickets, you can pull for Sonic V2 instead. Anyways, RMG, top 3 units, SS tier, moving on. Speaking of the devil, Sonic version 2 just got released, and my god is he fucking OP. definitely belongs in the SS tier. He does crazy amounts of single target DPS damage, the highest in the game currently, even more with his Keepsake once it does come out, as players are going to have a blast using him with his Keepsake. Also, his constant healing, his shields, his speed boosting capabilities is so good. He provides such great utility for your team. The only real downside is that his release was rushed way too soon, so that's why many players will have to gamble whether or not they should pull for him now or save for the SSR Plus era, as they are much better units overall. However, Sonic has great longevity, and he will also eventually be available about a year or two later within the superb purple ticket summons, which contains many of the later LSSR units, as well as having a pity system of 80 instead of the 180 that we currently have. However, this alternative isn't the most free-to-play friendly, as the tickets mostly come from funds, but those tickets will be given out every now and then from events and whatnot. So to summarize him, he's an amazing unit, definitely top 3, just poor release timing since I initially was going to pull for him, but Moontoon loved to ruin my hopes and dreams, so pull for him if you really want to. He belongs in the SS tier, he's very good. Moving on to the penultimate character, we have Watchdog Man, which belongs in the S tier. He is the best tank and utility unit. He has massive longevity due to his kit being very tanky, and he can play as a sub-core unit, where you don't even need a core with him in game modes such as Live Clash, as he is still really good without one if you use him correctly. On top of which, his seal is great for PvP and can change the whole battle if you have his Keepsake, where he seals 3 energy, which will only allow your enemies with Gyoro Gyoro being only able to ult once on the very first turn if they don't have Watchdog Man themselves. Not to mention that his ult is really strong since its damage is scaled from his max HP, which is even stronger during Gyoro Gyoro meta, so he is such a strong unit and he's going to stay up in the S tier for a pretty long time. And last but not least, we have Zombieman, which will also belong in the S tier. He's a core character, and even though his meta is long gone, he is still very useful in PvE content such as Club Boss Boros, where he can inflict injury and can tank and revive up to 6 times, which is just too good to be true. However, even in Club Boss Boros now, he can be subbed out as a tank and can be replaced with RMG, so Zombieman is slightly using his main usage the more you progress further into the game. However, he's still the best core for the hero side, and he's a mandated core for your hero tournaments, and especially in Dojo Clash, where you need your 2 best teams to progress further up in the leaderboards, which Zombieman and Gyoro Gyoro should be separated into their 2 separate teams. So he'll definitely belong in the S tier for now, and this is what the current tier list for Onepunchman the Strongest looks like as of August 2023. Now with these videos, I will also brush through the best keepsakes as of August. However, this segment will only contain keepsakes for LSSR units, since you shouldn't be pulling for any other SSR or SR keepsake, so this segment will be a lot more shorter. I'm also going to just skip towards the most important keepsakes, so for those in the C tier, they're not important, just don't bother at all. And in the B tier, they're also not as important, but they are pretty good if you do have spare funds to share. So going through the A tier, these are for if you have spare funds to spare, or if they're for your favorite characters, as these keepsakes are really good in each of their own ways. Boros' Keepsake is great for newer players that have $80 to spare, so it is fairly pay to win, but the amount of damage you'll be able to deal with his Keepsake is definitely noticeable, as well as having a cool animation whenever you use his ult. So his Keepsake is definitely worth it, which is only obtainable for a limited time during the beginning of the game, so you will have to think fast about whether or not you want to buy his Keepsake or not. Genos' Keepsake is also a very good option if you pull for Genos, as he hits like a nuke. This was a great option for spenders, but as we are very close into Bomb's release, Genos is going to die out fairly quickly, but he will still be amazing to use for 3-team game modes. Gyoro Gyoro's Keepsake is also very good, as his ult will be able to reduce the max HP of your enemies by 25%. However, his Keepsake was locked via the claw machine, which is a total scam, as MassX has emphasized, as well as myself. But as long as you had the gems and funds to make up for your gambling addiction, then his Keepsake is a great pull. And to top off the A tier, Watchdog Man's Keepsake is really good, since he can seal 3 energy, which heavily messes up Gyoro Gyoro lineups, as I stated previously, as your enemies will be only able to ult once in the first round, or 2 if they also have Watchdog Man themselves. I can understand if you did get for his Keepsake as a top priority, since he is super good, but the 3 that I am about to go over are absolute must-haves, and they should be your top priority for all players. So with these top priority S tier Keepsakes, first of all we have ATT's Keepsake, which is super powerful as her dot will deal devastating amounts of damage, especially with her force field being able to stay onto your enemies for 2 turns. You would definitely want to save your Keepsake vouchers for her Keepsake, as she will get you far in PvP and in Mirage Trials and Bounty missions. RMG's Keepsake is also another must-have, as her 5p awakening makes her absolutely cracked. She'll be able to follow up her attacks a lot more times, and starting from the very first round, which is absolutely necessary and must you need to have it for PvE, so I'd highly recommend pulling her Keepsake as top priority. And finally, to top it all off, Sonic V2's Keepsake is amazing, as he'll be able to deal ridiculously high amounts of single target DPS damage, the highest we're ever going to see until the end of the year. His Keepsake will also allow him to be the fastest unit in the game, which is an absolute must-have for PvP heavy players. So these 3 Keepsakes are definitely what you want to prioritize as your top choices. And that wraps up all of the rankings as of August 2023. If you want to stay up to date with everything you need to know about One Punch Man the Strongest, then subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell in order to stay updated on every video I release, in order to make your One Punch Man account the strongest. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and a comment down below if you have any questions about my video or possible future content. Until next time.